Welcome to the Cryptoteacher. And guys, I'm coming with a video just to make you think, and I'm going to come with this video early because it is Labor Day. And I'm going to come with you for the tales of two sides. Most likely, if you're white, you never heard of Black Wall Street. If you're black, you may have never heard of Black Wall Street, but also you never ever heard of the Battle of Blair Mountain. But guys, both of these happened at the same time, guys, 1921. And the reason why they happen at the same time is why? Labor. So the fact is that based in the Battle of Blair Mountain, they didn't want to pay these miners. We know the miners is one of the worst jobs ever. They use these red bandanas, and that's where actually the word redneck comes from. And these were white guys, black guys, immigrants. And then basically when we go to Black Wall Street, of course we had successful black people. Millionaires, if they may have been billionaires if you bring them to this time. So the fact is that the perception that they want to put out, as far as the government is concerned, they have to make you think a certain way. So we know that in Black Wall Street, you had very, very successful black people, very successful businesses, airlines, any business, theaters, anything you can imagine, blacks owned at the time in Tulsa. This is a Greenwood division. But the fact is that the government, of course, wanted to direct us in the way they want us to. So the fact is they came in, concocted a story. Of course, the story is that a young gentleman approached a elevator attendant, and the fact is that basically said that she was raped, and then all hell breaks loose. Of course, we know that this came from an article. And who runs your media? That's right, guys. That's right. So the fact is that basically with this article, it ignited the white mob. And of course, the Hegelian dialectic, white versus black. And we know no one wins in that situation. Only the top wins. So the fact is that basically you have Wall Street being bombed. And we know the only people who have bombs, guys, that's right, the government. So the fact is that why did they bomb it? So the fact is that you will never know what was there. They tried to rebuild it, but they didn't. But this didn't happen in just Greenwood. We had other places around. But it doesn't matter whether it's in white or black. The average American always have had their foot on their neck. So that's the reason why I'm doing this video for Labor Day. So you understand how the Hegelian dialectic works. Because way across the states, they can do this. So you may have been in a state that nothing's going on, whether you're white or whether you're black. But the fact is that basically you have states that are strategically keeping this fire going on, this black versus white. And it's always been like that over hundreds of years, this system that they have in place. And until we wake up to it, they'll keep it going. But y'all enjoy the video.
Hello, my name is Brandon Nida, and I'm currently a graduate student in archaeology at UC Berkeley. Right now, I'm researching Blair Mountain, the site of the largest class war in U.S. history, fought by 10,000 miners in 1921. This battle took place in the southern coalfields of West Virginia, near where I'm from. But don't be too surprised if you never heard of the battle. Most people haven't. Usually, Appalachian history is excluded and marginalized in American discourse. And when the region is discussed, it is usually done so by people from outside the region who use stereotypes and negative portrayals in the telling of our history. These stereotypes serve to mask a system of imposed exploitation that has impoverished the region for generations. The southern coalfields of West Virginia were industrialized around 1870. Part of this process involved a large-scale land grab by outside speculators who used dishonest and violent methods to dispossess the original settler population of their land. By 1890, with the development of large-scale and capital-intensive mines, the local and state government came increasingly under the control of coal companies. In the mountainous and sparsely populated southern coalfields, the companies built towns near the mines where the workers lived. These company towns became the basis for a system of extreme exploitation where the companies attempted to control the everyday lives of miner families. But against this oppression, the miners fought back and attempted to bring in the United Mine Workers Labor Union. The first attempt to organize the southern coalfields occurred in 1891, with the coal companies using violence to break this first strike. Over the next 30 years, class warfare broke out episodically in the coal fields of West Virginia. By 1921, both the coal companies and the miners were heavily armed and tensions were high. All that was needed was one spark to ignite the conflict. Today, a second battle of Blair Mountain is being waged, with the battle site being threatened by mountaintop removal, an extremely destructive form of coal extraction, where forests are clear-cut and whole mountains are blasted off. Currently, a group that I am part of, and which consists of academics, community activists, labor organizers, and union miners, are attempting to preserve the mountain. This is the history I want to reveal and unmask, about the Battle of Blair Mountain and the conflicts that have surrounded it. So let's go to the coal fields and meet some of my friends who are going to help me tell this story.
Oftentimes in the history books, what we get is a very focused explanation of what led to the Battle on Blair Mountain. The so-called Matewan massacre, which really wasn't a massacre because both sides had guns, but I believe that would have been, 1920, when Sid Hatfield and some of the men of Matewan ended up shooting up some Baldwin Felts thugs who were trying to evict some miners.
The Baldwin Felts thugs, we called them thugs, and everybody else did, and they called themselves that occasionally, I think. But anyway, these were armed guards to keep out the Union, and they kept it out in a very vigorous manner.
Company guards coming in, the Baldwin Felts coming in, basically trying to evict townspeople from company properties because their folks were on strike. And so they're basically going to try to impose themselves as the law in that town by virtue of their ownership of properties. And the townspeople just got their backs up against it.
Sid was a pro-union chief of police there in Matewan. And about a year later, then Sid and I believe Ed Chambers were murdered over in Welch, just set up and murdered by the Baldwin Felts thugs in revenge for what they had done. And oftentimes we focus on those events, and certainly that was the spark that led to the Battle of Blair Mountain. That was the spark that got these men so irritated they just formed up, somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000 and marched, going to Mingo. On to Mingo was the slogan. But it was only the spark, it wasn't the cause. The cause was that throughout southern West Virginia, we had what were effectively slave labor camps.
The West Virginia was largely scab, with a very, very little had been organized in West Virginia, not in the southern fields, that say almost, you could say not at all.
And so the northern coal fields, everything from Illinois, Ohio, Indiana, northern West Virginia, Pennsylvania, by 1910, give or take, were heavily organized by the United Mine Workers. And of course, those guys got paid real money. They got paid dollars.
The coal operators who were non-unionized in West Virginia were able to sell their coal much cheaper than the people in the central competitive field. So naturally, the coal operators, they wanted, that is in the central competitive field, they wanted to go ahead and get the West Virginia fields organized, so they were no longer had a competitive advantage, you might say, for that reason.
I'm going to tell you this. The first meeting that the union put on when they got into Logan County, I was there. When they started telling what all that the union could do. They say so that they had when they went to work for these coal companies. Man, that is what was suiting me to little teeth. That is when, then, that I started laying it down. I was the third man. I'm a charter member of the United Mine Workers of West Virginia. A charter member. And local union 6712. 6712. Paragon, West Virginia.
It was very rough too, wasn't it? Trying to change from non-union ways to union ways with the coal companies.
Oh yeah.
They didn't.
You had to fight out up every day.
Things were very very bad in West Virginia. I'll put it that way. I mean, all you have to do is read my book. If you'll do that, you will see that I have elaborated on that. I have elaborated on that a very great deal as to how the coal miners were treated, what the situation was.
Buddy, I tell you, is this about as rough as ever you could see?
Like what?
This wasn't no money. The coal company took everything that you worked for. The coal company got it all. The thing of it was, you couldn't get out here and go walk 2 or 3 miles to a mines to work. That's the reason they had these here coal camps, these houses
Close to
right
the
in the
mine.
coal camp where you had to pay rent on them. You just paid rent, $10 a month for a 4-room house.
Well, life in general in a coal camp, though, you paid the company the rent for their house.
They took that rent out of your pay.
You bought coal from them to heat your house.
You had to buy the coal.
You bought all your groceries, all your dry goods, your tools,
everything come from out of their stores.
Yeah.
Everything.
Miners were paid in scrip. Oftentimes never saw real money, and if the company caught you with real money, you might well lose your job, or they'd put you in a bad place to work until you understood that you were supposed to deal only at the company store and such.
It had some hard-ass bosses. It had some hard bosses then. And if they could put it over on you, they'd make you do any damn thing for nothing.
Yeah. Make you work unsafe or anything, wouldn't it?
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
And
no air. The miner would leave before daylight, and they'd be way in that night before you get home.
Mm-hmm.
I've come in, laid in the floor, maybe 2, 3, 4 hours sleep. When they come in, never change, never take a bath. You lay down on the floor and sleep. And they get me up, put me out there the next morning, back to work again.
This was a lot, accumulation of decades of events and events and conditions that had led to this. And it just finally got to the point where they couldn't trust the law, they couldn't trust the government, obviously, the state government or the local government. And so miners really felt they had nobody to depend on but themselves. It was up to them to change the situation. They couldn't vote it out, they couldn't pray it out, they just had to shoot it out.
But back then, I'd fight you into that one minute.
So what?
And we run him out. We didn't allow the store to put no hazelnut bread in there. We're running this thing now.
That's where a lot of the, when the union backed you, that's when a lot of strikes happened too, wasn't it?
Yeah.
They had the men bound together and would strike till they got, what they wanted and needed, safety and work and everything.
The chairman of your mine committee was the one that run that thing then. All the men watched that chairman of the mine committee, which I was one of them. If we was having an argument or something before we went into the mine with some boss or something about something, even after we load up in the man trip here, You keep your eyes on that mine committeeman. If he raised up out of that mine car, just raised up, by gosh, everybody else had hit the ground. I had no work. No work. I didn't have to say there wasn't no work. I had to watch to even move my head.
They watch you close, and they try to classify you as a radical or whatever, try to fire you. But see, that was one of the benefits of the Union. You know, the Union men all stuck together, and they got what they wanted. You know, it wasn't like it is now.
What the important thing I think they need to know is what really does happen when large amounts of capital comes into a state or a large industry. That thing takes over that industry, takes over all of the functioning of the state itself, and the power of them, what they do, because that's what the miners complained is that they own everything, and they did, and that sort of thing can happen and does happen and probably has in other industries, but it certainly has here.
But now
you let this show. They've let this message. The Union has sat on their damn ass there and let this goddamn massacre come in here and do this. If I was still in there, I'd never stop till they run that plumb out of the damn country. I mean, if it took a war, we would be right there in it.
I do have to say that the same capital organizations are in there. They are not in the power, with the power that they had back then, because they have opposition now. And the fact that that opposition was brought to the people's attentions and the fact that it could be done, this makes them a little hesitant about going ahead.
After they saw that we was running that thing, then they gave up. We had no more problem.
So, after roughly 50 years of exploitation, harassment, and suppression by the co-operators, the mining communities erupted an insurrection against this system. Their struggle culminated on the ridges of Blair Mountain, where for 5 days they fought against a private army that was backed by coal barons. Over 1 million rounds were fired over the course of the battle, and tear gas and explosive bombs were dropped on the miners by planes controlled by co-operator forces. But that's a story probably best left for another day.
Hundreds of African Americans were killed in one of the darkest chapters of Tulsa's and America's history. A lot of folks around here used to whisper about it over the decades, but nobody, black nor white, wanted to talk about it. And that history was being forgotten. Before it happened, Tulsa was the scene of a thriving, wealthy black community.
Black Wall Street was the most prosperous black-owned business district in 1921.
This was Black Wall Street. There were hundreds of black-owned businesses, everything from banks to pharmacies to the doctor's office. And black folks were making really good money. There were even 2 movie theaters, all black-owned and operated. Segregation was in full effect. We heard that there was a gentleman who owned a plane. Is that true?
Simon Berry was a pilot and owned his own plane.
Black folks were rich here, basically. They lived very good lives.
Many of them, yes. Yes, which caused some envy and anger among white people who commented, how dare those Negroes have a grand piano in their house and I don't have a piano in my house.
1921 rolls around. What happens?
Some type of confrontation between blacks and whites was inevitable because of the racial climate at that time, because of the presence of the Ku Klux Klan in almost every aspect of our society. But on this particular day, May 31st, 1921, a young black male named Dick Rowland, who worked as a shoe shine boy in downtown Tulsa, went into the Drexel building where he had been given permission to get water and use the restroom. There was a young white girl named Sarah Page who was an elevator operator. And Dick Rowland every day would go into the elevator with Sarah Page. On this particular day, after the elevator doors closed and Sarah Page and Dick Rowland were alone in the elevator, a few moments later there was a scream, the elevator doors opened, Dick Rowland ran and was later arrested, and Sarah Page initially claimed that she had been assaulted.
Brown says Page never pressed charges, but authorities did, and the damage was done. By the end of the day, the rumor mill said Page had been raped.
As word spread, angry whites were determined that they were going to take matters into their own hands.
A large crowd of white residents gathered at the courthouse. They demanded Dick Rowland be lynched. How did the black community respond to that demand to lynch this young man?
They were willing to risk their lives. They knew that they would be risking their lives to help defend Dick Rowland. And thousands of whites gathered in front of the courthouse. A white man approached a black man with a gun. He said, "What are you going to do with that gun?" He said, "I'm going to use it if I have to."
The two men argued. There was a struggle over the gun. It fired. The white resident was shot. All hell broke loose.
Blacks retreated to the Greenwood district, where they set up a barrier at the railroad tracks and were able for a short time to keep whites from invading their community. But because they were so outnumbered and outgunned, whites eventually broke through the railroad tracks and invaded what was home to Black Wall Street, the Greenwood district.
This was the result. 35 city blocks of the black neighborhood burned to the ground. Historical photos show black residents shot dead in the streets. The historical account is that at least 300 people were killed.
There were children that were here that had been armed by their parents, that had been told that they could come down to Greenwood and shoot and kill an innocent person. Those are the same people that we grew up with in our communities, that were a part of our society.
How many black people lost their lives?
There's really no way of knowing exactly how many people lost their lives, potentially thousands of innocent men, women, and children.
What is worse, survivors say they remember death not just in the streets, but raining down from the sky.
Many of our race riot survivors have commented that they remembered seeing planes flying overhead, dropping bombs, dropping nitroglycerin bombs.
Mrs. Hazel Smith Jones is believed to be the last living survivor in Tulsa. She's 97 years old.
My daddy wasn't at home, just the kids and mama. They came and got us.
Was it white people from the city?
And got us to fairground. And we was there for about 2 or 3 days.
To the fairgrounds?
And my dad didn't know where we were.
Did your family want to leave?
My mother, you know, with all this stuff going on, she thought it might have been safer with them taking us out there and being with more people.
Everyone called it a race riot. The opinion piece in the newspaper condoned it, calling Greenwood Niggertown. Do you consider it a riot?
No, ma'am. It was really murder. It was a massacre. My grandmother was awakened at night and just told to run. Just get up and run. And they ran. She was only 9. They ran for days. She got mixed up from her family and lost in a chicken coop.
Calling it a riot was convenient for a city run by whites. There's no statute of limitations for murder, but there is for a riot. For the black victims, it was devastating.
They never received any type of justice for losing their loved ones, for losing their homes and the businesses that they worked so hard for, that they built from the ground up.
Every insurance claim from the Greenwood neighborhood was denied. The claims totaled about $2.7 million. Black Wall Street did recover, but never to its former glory. Do you think life is better for black folks in America now?
Yeah. Some places, yes, some places, and some places not.
If there was any clearer sign that change in race relations has happened to this community, this was it. During a march for a black father slain by a police officer, half of those marching were black and the other half white, all marching in unison, saying Black Lives Matter. But there are stark reminders of the racism that continues to thrive in some people's hearts. So the marching and the worrying continues.
building downtown, and that the elevator operator, a 17-year-old white girl, screamed.
The Tulsa Tribune, which was the afternoon daily newspaper, printed a fantastic write-up of this event. They had a front-page story that said, "Nab Negro for attacking girl." Within the next hour, there's lynch talk on the streets of Tulsa.
So what do I mean by the secret spells of the English language? Well, let me share with you what I call our premier life sentence. And it goes something like this. We awake each morning and go off during the weekdays to earn the living at various jobs and undertakings until we come to the weekend. And this seems perfectly acceptable to most people. However, more people die between 6 and 9 on a Monday morning than any other time of the week. So I do what I call a translation of the English language, and I spell that Trance, with the idea that words cast spells. So when you translate that life sentence, you remember that awake is a funeral party for the dead. Mourning is the state you're in when you attend a wake. And you would have to be in a weekdays to earn the living, since urns are for the ashes of the dead. We call our jobs undertakings. Job itself is a Hebrew word for persecuted. And what we get at the end of this perverse bargain with life is the weak end of the deal as we become progressively weakened ourselves. And so our most prevalent greeting to each other is hello, the reverse of which is, oh, hell. And at first, I suspected the hands of collusion entangling the language to foster illusion. And I think it's quite true that a culture's theology has a great deal to do with a word's etymology and how it evolves over time to combine incompatible meanings that may undermine the original thoughts it was meant to define. But now, I don't think it's planned, for the thing that I've found is that like concepts can gravitate toward the same sound and vibrate at the rate that our thoughts designate. Because words are electromagnetic vibrations whose fine alphabetic tintinnabulations can take on the tint of our true expectations, which they then imprint on our metal of mind, causing sounds to adhere when they're of the same kind.